Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into what I know will be an engaging conversation with some of the city's most prolific Black community media and arts leaders. My name is Mike Payette, and it's a pleasure to moderate this panel, hosted by two of Montreal's leading organizations supporting the voices, legacies, and stories of the Jewish community, the Segal Center for the Performing Arts and the Montreal Holocaust Museum. I welcome you to the conversation streaming from the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Montreal is known in the Mohawk language as Ndejuru, or broken in two because of the way the river breaks around the island. It is considered unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. We know this land exists as a meeting ground of many peoples, including the Abenaki, Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and other nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I continue to discover my relationship to this land and its history, and I offer my deepest respect to the elders of these communities and to all of the Indigenous peoples who continue to urge us to learn and share knowledge. Now, over the past few months, and with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matters movement, responding to the continued shootings and deaths of Black folks here in Canada and in the States, the Segal Center and the MHM are committed to understanding the uniqueness of the Black community within Montreal, in the hopes of building bridges of commonality and values, emboldening the importance of sharing stories, building from our histories, and creating possibility for evolution in our cultural relationships. This is just the beginning. We are keeping the conversation going, but I'm honored to welcome our most esteemed guests to the virtual table to share their knowledge and experience while jamming on what they believe the future looks like and how we'll get there. So, allow me the pleasure to introduce four incredible Black entrepreneurs, innovators, leaders, storytellers, and activists, however you know them. We're so glad to have them with us. I'd like to introduce Rivka Campbell. Now, Rivka, hi, Rivka.
Hi.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to give a little bit of context about who you are, Rivka. Now, Rivka Campbell is a Jew of Jamaican descent, born and raised in Toronto. She seeks to build community among Jews of color in Canada while opening dialogue among the mainstream Jewish community about the experience of Jews of color. She is the co-founder of the group Jews of Color Canada and the sole Canadian recipient of the inaugural URJ's Juvie Nation Fellowship. Rivka is a recognized speaker on Jewish diversity and is filming a documentary on that very subject. She has lectured at Limud, synagogues, JCCs, community groups, and Hebrew schools. Her story and her work have been featured in several publications. And she also has a column called A Minority Within a Minority in the j.ca. I had to practice that a few times. She is also the executive director for the Beit Rayim Synagogue and School. Thank you so much, Rivka. I'm so glad that you're a part of this.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to welcome Nantali Indongo. Where's she at? Hey, Nantali.
Hi.
Hey. Now, if you don't know Nantali, if you don't know her voice, here's a reminder. She is the host of CBC Montreal's Provincial Arts and Culture program, The Bridge, which airs on Saturdays on CBC Radio 1, and she's an arts contributor for CBC Montreal. She's also a member of Nomadic Massive, a multilingual hip-hop group based in Montreal. And she's a graduate of University of Ottawa and Humber College. And Nantali has shared her knowledge of music and culture as a community educator and public speaker. Welcome, Nantali.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I just listened to one of your Nomadic Massive tracks that we'll talk about later. It was really awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's welcome Josa Maule. Where's Josa? Hey, welcome to the virtual table. Josa is the founder of the Montreal School of Performance, MSOPA. She's a casting director, actor, acting coach, director, and producer. Now, a little bit of history. Josa's true passion has always been entertainment. From a very young age, the ripe old age of 5, she spent many Saturdays participating in various acting, music, and dance workshops at the Negro Community Center. Now, MSOPA has been serving Montreal's acting community for over 28 years. Congratulations, Josa. She has mentored thousands of actors, filmmakers, and playwrights, encouraging them to have good work ethics, build bridges, and grow their network. She was featured as Acting Mama of Montreal in Maclean magazine in July 2016, edition featuring 110 Canadian stories. And she's received a few awards for her contribution to the arts and community over the years, and her work continues to inspire artists of all ages. Welcome, Josa.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. And last but certainly not least, we have Lisa Ndejuru. Welcome, Lisa.
Hello.
Hello. Now, Lisa is a transdisciplinary I hope everybody's writing this down. Transdisciplinary PhD candidate at Concordia University, and is a member of the Ordre des Psychologues du Québec, with certifications in Merino psychodrama and third-party mutual conflict resolution. She's a skilled practitioner of playback theater and co-founded the Montreal-based Living Histories Ensemble. Born in Rwanda, she has served the Rwandan diaspora in North America for more than 20 years as an organizer, researcher, and activist. And her extensive experimentation with storytelling, play, and improvised theater aims for individual and collective meaning-making and empowerment in the aftermath of large-scale political violence. Thank you all for your exceptional voices, and I'm so excited to just start chatting with you all. So I'm gonna stop talking, but I'm gonna launch us into this convo with you, Lisa. And I pulled this quote from Concordia's site, which I find very, very fascinating because it relates to this, the specificity of all of your practices. And I quote, "I work with survivors of organized violence to create accessible, non-medicalized, scalable strategies for healing and change after trauma and dislocation." And so I find that so fascinating because as someone with your wide range of disciplines and references and resources that really do span the globe, can you speak about how you work with those that come to you? What is your practice if someone comes to you?
So if someone comes to, I would say there's two things. If someone comes to me, then they come to me for a reason, right? And so mostly I listen to the reason. What is it that the person is looking for, is looking to achieve? And then what is in the way, right? Like I look forward first, and then what is now? And then we unearth material, and then we go with what is there. But when a person comes, it's because they want to get somewhere. And what I can do is to serve that thing. All of the different strands of things that I've been training for serve that thing. Yeah.
But in the base of your work, it sort of centers around the notion of using theater as a bridge to overcoming or moving through social or political trauma.
Yeah.
And so within that, and storytelling and legacy is going to come up quite often in this conversation, I think, because it's what I think unifies us all. But how do you embark, or how important is it for you to create that safety net, that environment that doesn't advocate for re-traumatization, let's say?
Well, the reason why I started the research was because I was raised with a lot of silences. And the reason why I worked with performance was to help us make the invisible visible. If you're looking at the individual working through something, it's one thing, but as a collective, as a community, we have such different perspectives on things, right? Like an event, like in our case, for example, the genocide of 1994. I am not a survivor of 1994. I'm a granddaughter of someone who was killed in the 60s, right? And so for the same reason. This is just history continuing, right? And so these, how do we put into a space, how do we create a space where all of these different perspectives, so people who are survivors, people who are not, people who were in the country, people who were not, people who feel torn between heritages, between their locations in the conflict, people who are completely not of that thing but touched, because how do we get them together in a space where all of the stories can be witnessed, held, and sort of stewarded in a way, right? Like the idea is to get back from this flattening thing. Violence flattens, right? Like when you say genocide, it's like a word bomb. But in fact, every experience has been different. How do we restore the uniqueness, the unicity of each experience to everyone, but make it so that it belongs to a whole again? Because we don't fall outside the world, right? We need to make a world. And so, yeah, I didn't speak to safety, but I was gonna say, don't get me started, but we're here to talk. So
that's why we're here. But I think there's probably a whole other conversation that we can have about like the environment and safety and protocol and what it means to sort of foster and support that. And Rivka, I wonder, just from your perspective, and I'm really hearing what Lisa's saying, the uniqueness of the individual, but within a sort of collective context. And you do, within your work and within your specific relationship between as a Jewish woman, and also as a Black woman, I was really struck by one of the observations that you made when you were speaking at a school a couple of months ago. And you spoke about the unique challenges of being a Jewish person of color, and acknowledging that the diversity within the Jewish community is not altogether recognized. And you brought forward a really awesome but interesting statistic of 12% of the overall Jewish community constitutes the broad ethnic and cultural spectrum. And yet there's a huge portion, as you write, that are still examples of intolerance or non-recognition of these Jewish POC within the larger community. And you refer to questions being asked of the Jewish community when entering Jewish institutions, for instance. Did you know that this was a synagogue? When did you convert? And I can equate that with the where are you from? But can you speak about that unique relationship that you have and the particular layers of being a Jewish Black woman?
Oh, absolutely. I always smile at that question, where are you from? Because it's not just where are you from, it's where are you from? No, where are you really from? But it always goes a step further. But, when not only within the Jewish community and outside of the Jewish community, when we think of who is a Jew, often an image comes to mind. And I like to say of either a Barbra Streisand or a, Woody Allen or Jerry Seinfeld kind of thing, right? Whenever I say that too, I also end up dating myself, but you get what I mean. And I do find that even though our community is so diverse, because even that percentage would be even larger if we embraced all of our diversity. So within Judaism, we have Ashkenazi, which is typically Eastern European. And sometimes we also tend to neglect the Sephardi experience, which is those from Spain and Portugal, or the Iranian experience, the Iraqi. So if you add all those other groups outside of Eastern Europe, that number grows even bigger. And yet we still focus on one type of look and one type of experience. So when I walk into a Jewish space, yes, I do get those questions. I get the kind of up and down look, or I get the no look, like I'm invisible, or I get the questions. And the questions always remind you that you are an other. And you need to explain how you got into this space. So I equate it to, you're a family, because we think of it as a family, and the Hebrew word is a mishpacha. So we think of ourselves as a family. So imagine you have a family of children, and one child always has to explain before he walks into his own home why he should be allowed into his home every single time. So it's a challenge.
Mm. Do you find that just on that thread, do you find that there's a difference intergenerationally, like, where there's less of a, I'll use the word progressive because it's a hot word right now, but sort of progressive thinkers who understand the diversity within various sects, or is that coming from a younger generation, an older generation, or it's just a hodgepodge?
It's a hodgepodge. It's a hodgepodge, and it also manifests in different ways. So, for example, older generations really sometimes can't even process the fact that somebody that looks like me belongs in the family, often in the same way that they entered the family. By that, I mean birth or whatever, right? And they may express it in an old school sort of way, right? Then we have the generation that might deem themselves as progressive, and the way they show how they perceive me is what I love to call those microaggressions. So they think they're being welcoming, but the language, it's only the language that is changed, right? So they may say things like, it's an interesting last name you have, or, so where exactly is your family from? Things like that you would, on the surface, doesn't seem like much, but when where they're coming from in those questions. So they just show it in a different way, or presume to, I'm trying to think of how I'd phrase this, or, no, I guess it's mainly microaggressions, or kind of try and overshow that they're allies by tagging on to, saying, oh yeah, but I understand because your people have gone through so much. And it's like, my people are your people. What are you talking about? So it's those things like couched in progressiveness, but really isn't.
I feel you're hitting on so many things that.
To quote Lisa, don't get me started.
No, I think folks have become really, really stealthy with how they want to get the information that they need in order to make them feel safe, right? And because it's a scary. For some, it could be a scary. Thought of this minority within a minority. It's like we can only focus on one thing, right? We can only focus on what's in front of us as opposed to what we inhabit and what we believe in. I love the fact that you mentioned the word family, and I think it's a perfect sort of segue into Nantali's relationship with Nomadic Massive, because you really have built a family of Black POC, non-POC members who have come together to build this community embracing music, hip hop, spoken word, storytelling. And Nomadic Massive was really one of few groups of its kind in the early 2000s. And you launched your first EP in 2005, and now the rest is sort of history. And I'm just sort of curious with the lack of spaces that existed during that time, and arguably still now, and really focusing on Black and POC voices within the Montreal community through music and through your art. Have you seen an evolution of who's actually a part of your larger community, like your audience community, who's coming to see your work or who's experiencing your work, and especially given the breadth of the identities that make up your Nomadic Massive?
That's so interesting, that question, because as the only Anglophone Black in the group. I'm not the only person born in Montreal, but the Haitian members, like Wally, who's a Haitian member of the group, our histories resemble. We're the only two people in the group who were born in Montreal, but Wally's of Haitian descent and Francophone, and I'm Anglo. And so much of what we do is coming from Afro-American oral tradition, right? It's a part of hip hop, and English is the primary language there. And then English Caribbean sounds influence all of that. So when I was a part of, I still am, when this group started, I realized that I wanted to see way more Anglophone Caribbean Blacks in the crowds. And I didn't see that as much. It took a while to get people there. But then what has happened over time, it's been 15 years. I think if I were to think about the nomadic audience, first off, people identified with us and identify with us still through the message of what we're saying in our music primarily, which is a message of inclusion, which is a message of humanity and questioning so many things. And then add on top of that, the diversity of languages and sounds that we use in our music attracts people as well. And so I think first off, that's who would end up in the audience. Of course, we're in Quebec, we're in Montreal, and sadly, hip hop culture and arts in general is divided through the linguistic, it's filtered through language as well. We were really existing on the main. We were on Saint Laurent Boulevard doing a lot of shows at Boba, which doesn't exist anymore, at the corner of Marianne, or at Petit Café Campus, or, at places where the English Black community who appreciated music and possibly hip hop music didn't really frequent. And I always wondered about that, going through that, because truthfully, I didn't end up in those venues until I was in this band, that's for sure. So even when I was in CJEP and I was already a fan of music and I was already trying to go see live shows, there was a certain area of the city that we would go to see things, and there the audience would be predominantly Black and Black Caribbean, and then add in some Haitian folks who would come all the way from the East or from Laval to come to a reggae show or something like that. But to me, that really played, for me, that was something that played into whether my people felt welcome to the musical community in general, especially where one that was looking more and more like a professional one, right? So we land in, we're a professional band. We weren't an amateur band. Like, we were applying for grants, we were doing all that work, and we still do. It's a career. And I noticed that the audience didn't necessarily reflect, that same desire that I wanted. But yet we're grateful though, because everywhere we travel, anywhere around the world, be it Europe, be it in the States, some of us have gone to Africa and performed there as representatives of the group type of thing. Even when we have Miriam in the group who's Algerian. And of course, when we do outside performances, this happens a lot. When we perform outside in a major city, anywhere, like in Toronto or here in Montreal, that community might land on Miriam's voice just randomly, like it was unintentional. And it's so amazing to see people's reaction when they see this Algerian girl who's Muslim, but they don't necessarily know that, and see her, sans hijab necessarily, but she's singing and she's rapping and she's doing it in English and she's doing it in Arabic and her language as well, and in her dialect and in French. And right away, there's like, oh my God, we're so happy that you exist. It happens with all of us. It happens, it happens when we go to Cuba. It happens when we go to Brazil. So we may not see the community in Montreal all the time, but we definitely see it more and more.
Okay.
And around the world, yeah.
What is that? Like, what is that? No pun intended. What is that bridge? See, every time I say, I'm just going to give you a little tech. No, but That's really striking. Like that difference within the Montreal Anglo community or Montreal Black Anglo community. And here there is this opening. Here there is this, not opening, but an invitation, a welcoming. And so I know we know geographically we're a different climate, and politically we're a different climate than, say, where Rivka is right now in Toronto. But I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts about why that bridge isn't clear, or why what is it that the Anglophone Black community isn't seeing in being able to enter these spaces?
I would say in Montreal, when it comes to the arts, I mean, I think it's just a question of literally being in Montreal, where the focus has been on the development of French language arts, right? That has been a primary focus. So if we're speaking of like the kinds of intersections that Rivka has been talking about, you know, I hate to put it this way, but this is how I do think about it. The English Black community is like at the bottom of the list with regards to many, many things, and the arts are no exception, despite the fact that we may have some artistic institutions that are there. Well, they're there to give a space and to be an outlet, like Josa can contest to, right? For Josa's not working exclusively with Black artists, but at least Black artists can go there. So I think, I think language becomes the predominant factor that trumps race, and then race trumps language depending on who you are. And if you try to push back and if you try to create in that space, then it's not about your language, then it's actually about who your cultural identity, and you're not Quebecois enough, or you're not Anglo-Quebecer enough, right? I think about that a lot. Like when we talk about the English Quebec community, which English are we talking about? I don't think we're often thinking about Nantali Indongo, who happens to speak English, you know? So I think that's primarily what the challenge is. Of course, when you get to Toronto, Rivka could attest, it's much more of a unilingual English space, and therefore creators, Black creators anyways, some creators don't have that barrier to get through.
Right on, right. Josa, do you, in hearing some of that, do you see that reflected in yourself as a producer, as a casting director, as a teacher as well, in terms of noting that given the fact that you work with so many different kinds of people, different in different ages, and the awareness that it's not equitable necessarily, that the industry is not equitable.
Well,
how would you navigate that?
Well, okay. I have many different ethnicities. Our students are very diverse, from the youngest being 5 to the oldest being 90. Yeah, and different nationalities. I have Francophones. I have Haitian, African. I have Asians. I mean, the list goes on. As working with certain filmmakers with Black productions, which I am working with right now, a few things have opened up with Montreal Black Film Festival, and there's also Black Wealth Media, and having this platform for filmmakers. As for actors, I mean, you know, there's the Black Theater Workshop, but there's not that many other Anglophone theater companies that will hire Black actors, and other than Black Theater Workshop. And I know when I was starting this school, the first thing people said, well, why don't you just go to Black Theater Workshop? You know, and this is like 30 years ago, and that's another conversation. But I started MSOPA. I was 25 years old, and people just kept on coming to me for Black actors. And I did not have that many Black actors. All right. And in fact, today, A majority of my students are not Black, in spite of what most casting houses may think. All right, and productions. It's like there's a Black production, call Josa Maule.
Is that given? Obviously, it's a combination of everything, but is that by virtue of you being a Black leader? That there's an assumption that you have that tie, that you become a different sort of casting agent in that sense?
Yes, pretty much. And I remember once with an organization for Black entrepreneurial, and they were interviewing me, and they asked me, well, how does it feel to be a Black woman in business? And I had to cut and say, look, I'm a businesswoman first. That happened to be Black. All right. I grew up, not seeing color, and I know there's color. I also grew up knowing my history, which I share that, and I can work with anybody, and I encourage my students to do that as well. But getting back to I can go off. In terms of Anglophone Blacks, no, there's not that much of a platform for us. And other than the Black Theater Workshop, and also, how many of them really do support our stuff? I'm just saying. I'm gonna call out there, and I feel because they don't feel there's that much of a platform for them, or there are people in our community. And I'm just going to put it out there. Here in Montreal, we say Black community, but are we really a community? Because you've got the Haitians, you've got the Africans, you've got the Caribbeans, and then, let's divide the Caribbeans now. You've got the Jamaican, essentially the Trinidadian, the Dominicans, and so on and so forth. So we don't come together as one because they all have all their different organizations. So, yeah.
It's great. How would you, is that a fault? Is that an opportunity? Is that just the reality and it's something to deal with? How do we shift that? How do we fix that?
Well, you know what? I mean, there's a lot of younger children coming up, younger generation that are part of these from these islands, but they're not joining any of these organizations because some of these organizations are not letting go. And the thing is that and Mike, you can agree and disagree with me, but it took a while for Black Theater Workshop to let go and let progression come in. All right. I'm sorry. I don't get in trouble for this. But I'm just being honest because there's so much for us to offer.
Right.
All right. And if we can come together, one as an Anglo community and as the Black people of together in Montreal, to support one another. We do as much as we possibly can. I mean, Gala Dynasty, Montreal Black Film Festival, and now with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and I know I'm probably going off right here, but we're asking for equality, but we've been asking that forever. We've marched. We've marched. I mean, our history, as rich as it is, they keep on trying to pull us back.
Well, I think you're.
Sorry.
I think no. I don't want to cut somebody off if somebody wants to say something, but I think you're hitting on many things. One, I think the amount of work, it sounds so trite, but the amount of work that has allowed for a moment like this to happen now, that has come before folks like myself, and I look at generations before me who have been fighting, who have been trying to have their voice heard, trying to ask for that equality. that we're only able to see these shifts happening now because of that work. But I also think we are landing at a place where there's a seismic shift in terms of the perspective of what it actually means for us to look inwards within our own communities as well as other communities. And I think, I'm talking to four leaders who I think had a level of access to this work, or fight me on this for sure, but level of, like, when I look, Nantali, in terms of your history, your parents were activists as well. That there's a kind of lineage.
They would never appreciate that name. My mother says this all the time till today at 83 years old. My mother says at Sir George, what my father, because my mother wasn't a student there, but what happened at Sir George Williams University and that occupation and that student riot, it wasn't about militancy. My mother really cringes at the word militant to be describing those students, my father included, because she sees it as they were just asking for equity, their equal rights. And therefore, one is not an activist in asking for something that one is entitled to have as a human being, right? So it's really interesting because people always, of course, everywhere in the telling of that story, my father, my parents, the community of people who were obviously engaged and involved in that are often called activists. And maybe some own that title, but it's so interesting that people like my mom refuse to accept that, because that means accepting that they were sort of demanding for something that they weren't necessarily supposed to have automatically, right?
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, guys, sorry, I cut you off there because I just...
Not at all. Rivka, you have something in Lisa as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw you unmuted, but maybe that was
sorry?
wrong. Lisa, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this idea of fighting for something that, that is just like life. You're supposed to, are you allowed to live? I mean, that's the level where it's at, right? To this day. When I'm going to defend my dissertation on October 27th. And I remember writing that in 1955, the first person who wrote a dissertation in Rwanda, for example, he was part Rwandan, sort of a Rwandan indigenous elder from a clan of wisdom keepers, and part from the clergy, which allowed him to go to school. And he did his PhD in La Géorgienne, in the Vatican, right? And his points, his argument was that we are human, right? My father's dissertation in, 83 was arguing that our traditional Leibesübung is sort of sports or the traditional ways we were trained, like people were trained, were not folklore, like play. They were sport, like that was that there's a, like this idea of it has value, right? Like you're defending that it's a real thing. Like we're real people with real thoughts. We have a soul. We are like in 83 or 84, right? Like I'm in 2020 and I'm thinking, and I remember writing, I didn't want to fight. I don't want to fight for that. I want to step equal. I want to step in there and say, like from the get-go and say, like I'm not, but I end up doing it anyway. Like I end up like fighting for my right to speak, or my right to that my experience is to be considered material to make knowledge of. It's
yeah. Yes, Rivka.
Yeah, and I also, it's interesting that that term was used because people will sometimes say to me, well, what do you want? Is it Jew of color? Jew of color this, Jew of color that? Is it special treatment? Is it this? Is it that? And I just say to them, I said, you know what? Actually, I look forward to the day where I don't have to have a group called Jews of Color Canada. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking you to treat me like you would any other Jewish person. Simple. I want to get to the point where I don't have to go around all over these places and talk about Jewish diversity. I want to get to the point where you just know that we are diverse people, and that's it. And to tag on to what Nantali was saying, there is the language of using the term fighting for, and sometimes even the language of activist. It automatically has a negative tinge to it. And I think in some cases when people use that deliberately, it is to put a negative spin on it. Protests versus, protesting versus rioting, It's a deliberate use of language to marginalize and put us here. When, as you so beautifully said, you and Lisa said, we're just asking why are we fighting for what we deserve? Why are we fighting for what should just be? The right to live, the right to go to school, the right to have equity, the right to hear our voices, the right to see our faces on boards, the right that every other person just has from the moment they're born in a different skin.
I don't know if you've been here. The word uncomfortable, right? Uncomfortable conversations or awkward conversations, and especially when it comes to discourse on Black representation, or basically along the lines of what we're talking about right now. And it's the question that I sort of leave with is uncomfortable for whom? So what is the discomfort? Is that totally what you're saying, Rivka? What is it that are you uncomfortable with me having the same rights? Are you uncomfortable with, are you uncomfortable with having the same access to the things that you have access to? And so these dated, and I think you're right, marginalizing terms are only helping a particular population to feel better, but doesn't necessarily work towards growth for us to feel grounded. Yes, Nantali.
I just wanted to jump in because I think that is exactly the question that needs to be asked all the time in all the spaces where we're talking about these changes around. This points to the systemic things, and being in the arts, being in politics. And the reason why I'm so encouraged by the way that you brought that up, I just recently did a special on radio, on CBC Radio 1 for Labor Day. And it's called Breaking the Code. And what we were doing is having a conversation looking at the history of systemic racism in Canada's legal code. So the first part, we had a conversation with a law professor, Constance Backhouse, who wrote a book on this. And she pulled out cases upon cases upon cases that touch aspects of racist laws, racist decisions, racist applications of the law. And it covered the country. It covered all kinds of groups that are considered racialized, not just Black. And then later in the segment, we had a panel discussion with Senator Murray Sinclair and Juanita Westmoreland Traoré, the first Black judge in Quebec, and Elle Jones, who is a journalist and a poet. And she calls herself an activist, so I'll call her an activist. And that was the thing that I really wanted to get at understanding is what is at stake? Why has it taken, or why is it still taking so long for things to change? It's taking long because there is something for someone to lose. And as it pertains to the arts, I think it's about you lose the narrative of all kinds of things. Like, you lose the narrative that your way of living is the only way of living. Senator Sinclair, when I asked the question, he said, middle-class values are at stake when it comes to the legal system. He talked about judges making decisions to send Indigenous youth to jail because they thought that would be good for them, and he said they have no idea what happens in jail, right? In the arts, you lose the comfort of your way of speaking being the only way to speak or to express oneself or to tell a story. You lose the monopoly on so many things in the arts that have been reinforced by marketing, especially. That's what you lose. You lose that Little Red Riding Hood is not the only story, is not the only myth,
What?
You lose that there are other mythologies. You lose that Anansi actually is an important folkloric character in African and Caribbean, in West African and Caribbean traditions, and therefore that informs a whole other tradition. You lose the canon. How about that? You lose, So
and
yeah.
Wow.
And like when it comes to like Black film productions, when we go to the table to get a grant, it's like, nobody's going to be interested to watch that, and that's been, now they're like, okay, I had this conversation with somebody, goes, you should be happy now. They're only looking for diversity. And yeah. He's still breathing though.
Sorry.
With a high body, but I mean, like, I just went off on a rant because, one, for forever and a day, they're only bringing diversity now because everybody is speaking up all over. All right. And you can't deny it because we've been around forever. And we've been around forever, and it's like, of course we need Black people in the background or whatnot. Like, really, and again, going back 28 years ago, the trend was everybody has to learn to speak American Standard English, like you come from nowhere. All right. And then it's like, could you sound a little bit more Latina? Could you sound Black?
And what does that sound like?
What? Well, that was my thing. I guess he was trying to get me to do ghetto, but it's like, I grew up on the South Shore in Longueuil. It's like, could you sound more Black? I was like, ooh, but it's aggravating. But now, we're getting our stories out there bit by bit. We're, with the new technology, thank God for that. We can do that with our own iPhones and so on and so forth. But Rivka, just a quick joke. I remember quite some years ago, Kenny Robinson, he's a comedian in Nova Scotia. And he said, Of course there's a Black tribe, but they knew we would not wake up in time, so they gave us the wrong directions. It's a joke.
No comment. I defy the stereotype of the Jewish person who's always late for services, the Black person who's on colored people time, because I'm always on time.
Change it. At least I see that you have something to add.
Yeah, I was thinking about, what are people losing? Yeah. There's on the one hand, what are people losing? And on the other hand, I was thinking about what are that tide, right? Like right now, we have platforms because of the moment, the tide is this way. And what are we going to do so that when the tide goes back, what stays, right? Like that it's like we have done something that it stays. Like we're not going to move with the tide again, right? So in terms of losing, what is lost, I agree with Nantali when, like, the way I see it is references, right? We will do like our, even on an individual level, right? As people, our brains, if you try to change something for yourself, like try any kind of change, right? Everything inside of you is gonna say, no, no, I'm not doing it, right? Like there's everything is built to, and you have to like make yourself go through this thing, even on an individual level. Like if I think about how many times have I wanted to lose those pounds? I mean, it's not like I don't know how to do it. Like I know how to do it. That's not the point. But if I'm thinking about me as an individual, what I have to go through to get myself from, and speaking about time management, I could speak about time management, but I won't. But when I think about the energy that goes into changing myself as one person, never mind a collective,
Mhm.
right? I think that
Can-
like those references.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, please. I was just going to say, when you talk about what you have to lose. So I want you to think about the Jewish community and what you think of when you think of the Jewish community. And that is what people in the community feel they'll lose if they start to emphasize other ethnicities within the Jewish community. Right now, let's talk about food, the go-to. Lox, bagels, gefilte fish, anything you can think of that's Eastern European. Well, what do you mean we'll introduce stuff from other places? But this is Jewish. This is Jewish. Language, Yiddish, everything's Yiddish. Well, what do you mean? There's Ladino. Yeah, it's like, well, what do you mean Ladino? But what about our Yiddish? What about our culture? Because it's been such a dominant force. That is what they feel that they will lose, that it will be diminished if we dare bring in the rich diversity that the Eastern European, and God forbid that should happen, that we lose our culture, which is an irrational fear, but it is a fear. And if anything, they have to somehow flip that thinking and realize that it's not a replacement. It is an enrichment. It is an enrichment, not a replacement.
But this idea of the zero
And that's why
sum is
Canada,
crazy, right? Like as though there was a zero, as though we were not already there, right? Like, like
and I'll tell you, part of it, I think, the fear of being replaced is because I think deep down inside, they are aware that in some ways, a particular culture within Judaism has replaced other cultures.
Fascinating.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
So I think, somewhere in here, they think, it's a possibility, because if we're really honest with ourselves, we've kind of done that.
I think that in the
Well-
I don't want to like speak in the Jewish context because like who am I? And I'm thinking at the same time coming from a genocide place,
Yes.
the idea of replacement is
Mhm.
so charged. Like
Mhm.
I don't like. Whoa, that's
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But therein lies a commonality, right? Therein lies that link, that cultural community link as it relates to the histories and again the legacies of what we are representing in the now. So Josa, I know that you had something. I want to shift to something, but did you want to add did you want to add on to what we were just chatting about?
Well, no, it's okay.
Cool. I do want to, because I am cognizant of time, and I feel like we're just like, well, we've been rolling for a good hot minute now, and I like it. But I do want to look towards the future. I do want to, based on everything that has come up, even in this conversation, what is it that what do we envision to be the future, let's say in like 5 years, as to what it is that what would we like to see? Is it happening? Are we noticing an evolution? Do we have an opportunity to be optimistic, to be hopeful? in not just within our community, but again, the bridging of Jewish community, the Black community, that enriching relationship.
The indigenous communities.
Yes, Indigenous communities, absolutely, absolutely, and in POC communities, absolutely. What does that look like to you?
Well, on my end, I always go for diversity, including my shows. Like for Black History Month, they would be Asian, white, Iranian, just a mix of everything. And it would be nice for all theater companies to open up to every diversity, not just, the Black Theater Workshop or I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong, Terceria.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to see inclusion for all people of color and ethnicities. And because I think that will encourage the children of tomorrow, seeing everybody working together.
Beautiful. Thank you, Josa. Rivka, what about you? What do you envision?
First of all, I was smiling because, just as an aside, there's this meme going around Facebook that when people were asked that question 5 years ago, how they see themselves in 2020, it was like, not like this.
I know.
So that's all I could think of. It's like,
really feel like an arbitrary year.
Yeah, so I'm almost afraid. And what do I see? I see the Jewish community. Now, it's interesting. I don't necessarily have to say, oh, I see, boards being more diverse, because I would like to see that, obviously. But what I'd like to see even deeper than that, I would like to see an understanding of how we interact with each other. I want to see an understanding of, how your privilege affects those of us who don't have it. I want to see more of an understanding. I don't know if I'm making any sense. Like that's what I want to see. I want to see that I don't have to keep running the how not to be it's a side title and I can't finish the rest of it, course. I would like to see that we get it. The Jewish community gets it. I don't even know if I'm articulating, because it's such an intangible. It's not like saying, I'd like to see 3 Black people on my board. It's, even I would just like to see a deeper understanding of who we are as a people and a deeper appreciation. And I want to see a better education of who we are across the spectrum in the Jewish community.
Excellent. That's excellent.
And I think what Rivka, what you just described is exactly where we should be in general on this question in 5 years. I don't expect these same issues that we're discussing to no longer be issues. I don't expect in 5 years that Black bodies will not be treated with violence in the face of any kind of authority. And I really want to stress that in Canada, the conversation has been predominantly about policing Black bodies and to quote the title of Robin Maynard's book, but about the relationship with the police. But in my opinion, the violence against Black bodies exists in education, especially in Canada. So I think that it would be unrealistic for us to think that we will have these magic things. And I also think that in 5 years, we shouldn't expect to have diversity on boards and casting and et cetera. I think in 5 years, we need to make sure that from now until those 5 years, these kinds of conversations still happen and happen to engage at a deeper level every time. Because as I've said many times in the many meetings on this question that we've been having at CBC, for example, I've been conditioned for 44 years. I've been conditioned as the Black person I am, based on a history that has existed for a very long time. And that means non-Black communities or white communities or whatever you want to call them also have been conditioned for a very long time. So for us to expect that kind of deep, as Lisa pointed to, how difficult it is just as the individual for us to make a change, for us to expect that a deep-seated change, an instantaneous change rather, is going to happen in 5 years would be really naive. And I think to almost pass the baton to Lisa, that image of the ebb and flow and the wave moving, right now the pendulum is yeah, the pendulum is shifting. We could do one of those challenges. The pendulum is shifting. And we're seeing, yeah, exactly. We're seeing huge changes that look like instantly, like, oh, hey, we got the show up, we got this conversation, and like Josa was saying, now people should be happy there's things. We have to wait for the dust to settle for that stuff, and then we have to like rev back up the motor and be like, okay, let's keep going, and we cannot get tired. And sadly, the people who are the most marginalized, who exist with the most intersections, we're the ones who are going to carry the most of this work. We are the keepers of all of this knowledge and experience, and therefore a lot of the solutions. And so we can't get tired, because we're going to have to continue to engage in these conversations.
I think that what is beautiful is I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but my nephews and nieces are teenagers, and my generation of women, when the sort of the demonstrations happened and the children were like, this is outrageous and it cannot be, and we were sort of looking at each other, sort of what's outrageous now, like what has changed from, and so, but then the children demand that we feel. And then we were talking to each other. I remember we were on a Zoom call, and my sister was saying, what can I tell you? I've learned to put all of this feeling somewhere in a box. I put my head down and I go. I work. That's all. I've learned to not to numb myself to this thing, and then to know that she was saying how she was happy that the children gave her the dared her and exiger. They demanded that we feel again. That we don't, that we don't put it somewhere where we can manage it, put our heads down and just do it. That we actually feel this outrage again, because it's exhausting, right? Like it's exhausting. And one of the beautiful things that I found in this time is all of the circles of care. There's so many circles of care. I'm so in love with my community. I'm like on you guys. Like there are so many of. And these relationships are like, and the other thing that I want also is that we have I'm working on an archive of pre-colonial wisdom stories from Rwanda. This is my postdoc, and so I want to be able to talk to people who draw like visual art, sound. And all of these symbols and ideas and ways of thinking that they seep in everywhere, and they make their way also to be part of all of it, right? Like just to be part of all of it. That's all. Yeah.
I don't think there's a nicer way to close or put an ellipses on this conversation. I look forward to the embracing of what I feel right now in this virtual table of mutual respect, of honoring the challenges and being able to see forward while respecting and learning from before. And so thank you so much, Rivka, Josa, Nantali, and Lisa. This has been incredibly enriching. And like I said, we can go on for more. I do want to give you, your organization some shout outs. I will say it, Nantali, check out Nomadic Massive, check out CBC, The Bridge. Rivka, check out Jews of Color Canada and the amazing work that she is doing across schools as well. Josa, Maule with the MSOPA, check them out. And you can please follow Lisa's practice and her work. It's such stimulating work, Therapy Den. There were a couple of companies that were mentioned. We got to give props to the Segal Center and the Montreal Holocaust Museum for putting this together. Yes, Lisa.
I just wanted to say that the Therapy Den is a directory of therapists.
Yes.
That is in the States,
yeah.
And that I only have a little profile on it. So
okay.
If you,
well, it'll be the beginning of the profile to dig a little bit more
there you go.
to follow
Thanks.
your work.
Thanks.
I'm very inspired by the movement of our community, and I mean not just within this table, but also the prospects of what Montreal can do. And I think we are in the beginnings of some real shifts and evolution, certainly in the conversations. And so thank you, guests. Thank you, Segal, and thank you, MHM, and have an awesome evening.
Keep the conversation going. Good night,
Yes.
everybody.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night. Nice to meet you.
Yay.
Oh my gosh, it's been awesome. I felt so honored.
Yeah.
You know, I'm Googling all of y'all.